Hello and welcome back to this damn Palladialistic Crusade. This video will be a follow-up to my review of Kino Lorber's 2015 Blu-ray release of the 1925 and 1929 versions of the classic silent masterpiece, The Phantom of the Opera. Any fan of this film will know that it's extraordinarily complicated and convoluted release history on both original releases, attempts at doing a sound release or reissue or talkie reissue with new footage inserted, and then all of the multitudes of different release versions of even the 1925 original, and then all the complicated video history and release history, and then the prints that surfaced and all the versions that are lost to us. And it is extraordinarily complicated to understand the release history of this film. We still don't know everything about it. New information still comes to light, and unfortunately the primary sources we have are still compromised due to the sources that are actually still available due to most of the versions and original sources being lost to time. So it's not an easy film to release on video or even restore, shall we say. So the fact that there are still two primary restorations found on two different disc releases makes sense. So today I'm going to be talking about the BFI's release of The Phantom of the Opera, which uses the Kevin Brownlow Photoplay restoration, or I should say the 2013 HD upgrade of it from a brand new 2K scan of source elements. So this essentially is a HD upgrade from a 2K scan of the 1996 Photoplay restoration of the film, which has been released to disc previously. And I talked quite a bit about the history and different versions of the film in my video on the Kino release, so I won't go into all those details again here. I'm trying to focus primarily on the strengths and the contents of the BFI release and why I think it's really important to have it in conjunction with the Kino release, because unfortunately I don't think there's a perfect version of the film, and I don't think there's a perfect restoration either, because everything's compromised due to what's available, and we still don't have all of the necessary information in trying to even determine what it is when we're looking at the 1929 labeled version of the best surviving source quality, because it's from 35mm materials versus the 16mm materials available for the reconstruction of the 1925 original version, or I should say the original general release version, because of course again there were multiple versions in 1925 at different premieres that had different endings and different footage added and different edits. So if any of the previous 1925 versions ever turned up, that would be an unbelievable find. But anyway, that again goes to further demonstrate how it is extraordinarily difficult to talk about this film, and more recently an actual picture reel of the talkie version surfaced, and you can find that on the BFI disc, which is a real treasure and an important reason why the BFI disc is important to have in your collection. But again, it's not easy explaining this stuff. If you're coming to this film for the first time, you're in for a lot of confusion, and most people have only seen the sort of 1929 de facto standard version. That's the version that gets shown and put out on all the public domain releases, and that's the version that usually gets restored because it is the best of the best picture quality, because it is coming from 35mm materials. It does have issues of its own. Some different versions will color tint it differently. Different versions, of course, have different scores and different frame rates. The frame rates really vary, and that will determine what score will sync with the film, because different scores are recorded at the film running at different frame rates. But also there are additional bits of such as the colored sequences. You have the hand Schlegel coloring process coloring of the Phantom's cape when he is on the rooftop of the opera house. That was missing and not in any version for the longest time until the more modern restorations, and they approach that differently in how they handle recreating that effect. But also the discovery and reinsertion of the Technicolor footage shot into color Technicolor for the Balmass sequence. That was literally just discovered and inserted into the 1929 version, and some versions still stick with a black and white or tinted version as opposed to the Technicolor version. Those are just two of the examples of variables that exist in editions of Phantom of the Opera, and just talking about the 1929 version. The other would be the infamous opening Man with the Lantern sequence, which is still debated on its origin and why it's there, and is it even supposed to be there. It seems like it was most likely part of the attempt of making a talkie reissue, because of course we have this figure in the darkness and he's obviously speaking and saying something for a solid minute and a half, but of course we don't have the sound or anything for it. Different theories apply as to why this exists and why it's randomly on both versions of the film, in terms of the 1925 reconstruction and the 1929 version that we have. If you looked at the sources themselves, it's on both of them in two different fashions. Some versions actually remove that because it probably was not part of the original release. And that's what happens on the Photoplay version found here on the BFI disc. So this does have the coloring of the Phantom's cape, replicating the Handschlegel process with the flowing cape suddenly colored red. It does have the Technicolor Balmask sequence, and it does completely excise the Man with the Lantern sequence from both its restoration of the 1929 version and its presentation of the 1925 reconstruction. So neither opens with the Man with the Lantern sequence. However, it is actually included as an extra in HD without any color tinting, so you can look at it in actually really nice quality, I must say. Probably the best I've ever seen it quality-wise, but as a separate extra, which I think makes sense, but I think for Phantom scholars, it might be better if it was presented as a branching option, so you could view the film with or without it, I guess. But it also it will throw off the score. If you have a score that isn't recorded around the Man with the Lantern bit, then obviously you would have to encode it separately from the main transfer and then have the score pick up once that ends. Now, what are you getting exactly in this BFI release, and why do I think it's important? First of all, it is a region-free release, so you can get this and you don't have to worry about having a region-free player. It's also not terribly expensive either, so even if you have the Kino or you don't have any release of Phantom, I think it is definitely an important release to have in your collection. Now, it is a single disc Blu-ray with 2 PAL DVDs included, so of course you'll need PAL capability if you're just in Region A for Blu-ray to play the DVDs. However, the DVD disc one is identical content-wise to the Blu-ray, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. Now, on the Blu-ray, you have 2 versions of the film. You have the 1929 restored version, and this is essentially a brand new HD transfer and version of the Photoplay restoration. So basically, it is recreated in the HD realm. The credits list, it was a 2K scan of elements and presented here on this Blu-ray in 2013. It follows the same pattern of, again, removing the Man with the Lantern sequence entirely. It has the Carl Davis score here in lossless PCM stereo, but it also now has a 5.1 upmix and DTS HDMA lossless. However, it is the same score track. I will say on that front very quickly, I did think both sounded excellent, but I do think it does actually sound better in stereo. I don't think the 5.1 really adds anything other than ambiance and directly locating, or I should say directly sending some of the low-end bass of the recording to your subwoofer. So it might be better in your home theater environment. You'll have to toggle back and forth between the two. However, it is the same score that Carl Davis did for the Photoplay restoration. Of course, this is color tinted. It is exactly like previous releases of the Photoplay restoration. However, because this has now been recreated in the HD realm from a brand new 2K scan of elements, it is of far superior quality. The film is running at a 20 frame per second speed. Silent films, of course, vary in their frame rates, and that usually causes all kinds of problems in various video transfers, particularly ones not done very carefully, or because the Blu-ray format, for some stupid reason, does not allow a lot of different frame rates. There has to be some trickery involved in encoding discs to sort of pack in a different frame rate into a standard 24 or 29.9730 frame per second rate. Here it is at 20 frames per second, which really is, I think, the the proper speed to see this film at. It seems to run the best. Different releases have had it at 24 frames per second, which that really didn't look right, and then others have tried like an 18 frames per second, but 20 seems to be the sort of accepted standard idea of what the film should run at, and it seems to work the best, and I think that's how it should be viewed. That's how I recommend people watch it on the Kino release if they've got the Kino disc, because it gives you the option of 20 or 24 frames per second. I should also mention the 1929 version has additional scenes and new material that was shot for the reissue version, some with the same actors coming back, and that causes frame rate problems because it was shot at a different speed than the silent version, and then the materials were mixed for a print reissue run. Again, there were several versions of this, but that means that the other bits of material played around with or added to or inserted into the original film does not match in the frame rate, which causes problems again in restoration and video transfer. There's a number of ways to try and handle this material, and everybody seems to try it different ways. A lot of this has caused problems on previous releases, particularly in throwing the score sync off. The Kino has definite problems in that area. Here, what they seem to do, at least what it looks like, is I think what they're doing is they're letting it play out at the normal 24 frames per second speed, and then everything else is the standard 20 frames per second for the original 1925 silent footage. And by the method of encoding the transfer, they're able to mix and match the two. So if you've ever wondered why in the 29 version there are some portions that move a little bit weird, they look a little weird because the movement seems a bit different, that's because that is really material from the reissue version that is at a different frame rate, and obviously it won't ever match properly with the rest of the footage, which is at a different frame rate. So I think that's another sign that really shows that this new HD master, this 2K scan recreation of the Photoplay restoration, I think is technically the most polished version of Phantom of the Opera in terms of all the restorations. It is color tinted throughout, and I think the color tinting is very much, it's very on point, and it maintains the tinting ideas throughout. It's usually a sort of amber brownish for the actual opera auditorium. The sort of underbelly of the opera and the various catacombs and things are usually shades of purple. Exterior nighttime scenes, of course, are dark blue or not really greenish, but very much dark blue. And it pretty much sticks with these, so it establishes that rhythm very quickly, which is important to do because color tinting is important, but it's a very difficult balancing act, and a lot of times you're having to guesstimate things because unfortunately there are either no surviving paper documents in terms of instructing people how to do this, or there's no surviving major sources to really indicate what it should be timed as. I will say again, it does entirely dispense with the Man with the Lantern opening sequence, so that is not in the transfer. It's just available as an extra. That's how the Photoplay restoration has done it, and that's why the Carl Davis score isn't even composed for that sequence. So there's that particular. Also, it does include the Technicolor Balmass sequence. However, rather strangely, it's actually window boxed in this transfer. I found that quite bizarre. So that means you have extra black masking on the top and the bottom, literally meaning that the image is window boxed in the center of your television frame. I really don't know why that was done. There doesn't seem to be any reason for it. It is not that way in the other HD restoration that is found on the Kino release. But I'm guessing maybe it was to try and cover up some bits of damage and things that were deemed too intrusive, but it was rather bizarre. I wish that hadn't happened. There's also a brief example of that where they were trying to cover up and the most damaged portion of the film where Christine wakes up in the Phantom's lair. There is in that sequence in the surviving 35mm material that has bad nitrate decomposition, and so So in the Kino release of that restoration, they pretty much left it as is, so you can see that sort of coming in and out. Whereas here in the BFI presentation, I think what they did was they tried to use some 16 millimeter footage of the other source to try and patch in to cover up around the spots of damage, and then it's also window box. So I think that's also just like a brief sort of moment to try and cover up some things they did to try and make it at least look a bit more palatable. But then, of course, there's a quality changeover when it goes back to the 35 millimeter material. But I thought that was just important to note. That's just a particular decision choice of this restoration. But I just thought it was really strange seeing the Balmass sequence window box. That just I really don't that just didn't work for me. But most people may not notice, but I just thought that was rather interesting because I hadn't seen that particular approach done in quite some time in order to perhaps cover up something. So that concludes what you find in the 1929 version, which again is pretty much a brand new HD recreation of the photoplay restoration. Now, when comparing it to what you're looking at in terms of the Shepard Blackhawk Films HD restoration, or I should say latest restoration in HD, and essentially the sort of third version of it, which you find on the Kino Blu-ray, again, I think the photoplay version here on the BFI is the most polished, the most technically superior, I would probably say, because what you find on the Kino is, I'd say, maybe more of a sort of warts and all type approach of not trying to cover up any of the damage, and also being much less intrusive with the tinting choices. That it seems very much a more removed sort of approach. However, the tinting I don't think is as rigorously structured as it is in the photoplay version. So it's a bit more trying to think of the right word. It's a bit less studious, maybe, I guess, if that's a word. I hadn't figured out how I would even try and word this, but I kind of like the less obtrusive quality of the tinting found in the Blackhawk version on the Kino disc, because again, that's the third version, because Image did the first two Blu-rays and they both had issues, and the Kino still has issues, but it does fix a lot of those, particularly in the issues it had with color tinting in prior versions. That's not to say the photoplay tinting is bad. I do think it really works for this restoration. I don't think screen caps do the tinting of either version justice. I think you really have to look at both transfers. I think they both work really well for what they're doing. But again, I think the whole approach of the two restorations is a little bit different. I think the photoplay version is trying to be as technically superior as possible while trying to eliminate any bits of damage and make the most pristine preservation or restoration possible. Whereas the Blackhawk version 3 on the Kino, I think, is trying to make the most technically superior version of a sort of restoration that's more trying to preserve the elements that we have instead of trying to improve them in all areas, if that makes sense. And for me, just in my own opinion, with this particular film, with the elements that survive, I kind of lean more towards preferring that on the Kino disc. So in terms of the image and the overall appearance of the 29 restorations, I think the BFI is technically superior. It doesn't have the frame rate issues or the score sync issues that are on the Kino version. However, in terms of what you're actually getting in the restoration, I really do kind of prefer the approach that was done on the Blackhawk version, on the sort of HD version 3 on the Kino disc, where it is, it does show much more damage. There are some hairs poking in. It doesn't cover up the nitrate decomposition in that sequence, and but it also doesn't window box the Balmass sequence, which I thought was, again, I just thought that was kind of bizarre seeing that in the photoplay version. But it's something about that sort of warts and all approach that I kind of preferred. However, that version does have frame rate issues still, and it does have sync errors with the scores. So unfortunately, it has technical problems still, whereas the Photoplay version has none of those. So it is a really well done disc, and the on the other hand, for the Blackhawk version, they've gone through 3 different Blu-ray releases, and it's still not right. So hopefully, if somebody else decides to reissue the film on Blu-ray and use that restoration, they might finally get around to fixing all the problems, because that would be nice. But you don't have to deal with any of that on the Photoplay version. So if you want one release of the 1929 version restored that has no technical problems whatsoever and has a beautiful new scan and far greater detail than any previous release, then I do think you have to go with the BFI release. However, the Kino does have important extras, and I do think actually the Kino has the better score. I really do enjoy the Thibodeau score that was done back in, I think originally in '97 for the Image Laserdisc, and that's the score on the 20 frame per second version on the Kino disc. So I do actually prefer it to the Davis score on the Photoplay. So that's another reason why I do still kind of side with that, even with the technical problems on the Kino disc, because I do think the score really fits the film extraordinarily well. It's probably my favorite score overall for Phantom. I've heard probably at least 5 or 6 different ones, and honestly, they all have something to them. They each have their own fans. And I do really think the Carl Davis score is good. I should say really great on the Photoplay version, but I don't think it fits every scene as much as I would like it to, and if I had to choose between the two, I would still go with the Thibodeau score on the Kino release as my sort of preferred score for the 29 version. But again, the Davis score is excellent, but that's just my own personal preference. Now, the other presentation is of the 1925 version, otherwise known as the Hampton version, talking about the collector who went through every print source he could find of the 16 millimeter surviving prints of the show at home consumer versions of the 1925 general release version of the film, and that's how we have it preserved, is in this mixture of surviving consumer prints of the 1925 original release version. Now, this has been presented a number of different ways. It has different scores, and it's been presented at different frame rates, and some versions with color tinting, some versions entirely without in black and white. Now, interestingly here, while on the Kino it was a newer preservation with color tinting and a new score, it was an upscale of a standard def source, so it was not in HD. However, I did think it was a really impressive presentation, and for the most part, I liked what the color tinting did. On this release, though, and I think this is the big draw to this release, this is a brand new transfer in full HD of the Hampton prints. So this is the 1925 version in HD. It actually has a bit more image than a lot of the other versions, which are seemingly cropped. So it is definitely the best quality I've ever seen for the 25 version. It has a brand new piano score in stereo PCM by Ed Busey. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's actually quite a good score. I don't think I like it as quite as much as the score that's on the Kino Disc 2 of the SD upscale version of the 25 Hampton print. And then there's also the really good John Marsalis score for the 25 version on the old Milestone DVD, which is still essential to have for the extras it has. But yeah, I still think it's a very serviceable score. It was done especially for this release. And again, the quality of this is unbelievable because it is a modern HD transfer. Now, it's not a full restoration or anything, and weirdly, it has 1 or 2 spots, particularly in the opening titles, where it does a freeze frame for a second or two. It does that at least twice in the opening titles, and then at least at one other point, I think in one of the title cards. And I guess that was maybe done to preserve synchronization with the score for a second, or they might have reworked or transferred some of the various prints that constituted or made up the Hampton print compilation, which I think would be a very good idea to really go back and go through all of those prints again and do a modern scan on them to perhaps get past old bits of damage or be able to do in the digital realm what couldn't be done back in the day and when they were originally compiled into the lone Hampton print. So you will note that when you watch this, but it is also black and white. It does not have any color tinting, which, I mean, I've seen the 25 version this way before, so, I'm used to also seeing it in black and white, but I do think it's a shame that they didn't do any color tinting, because I think that would have made it even more impressive. However, the fact that this is in HD and the best quality I've ever seen the 25 version, that alone makes this an essential purchase, I think. And it is encoded on the same disc. You actually go under the extras and you select the 25 version. So it's not done on a separate Blu-ray, but I didn't notice any issues with it having, a lesser encoding or bitrate because it's two versions on the same disc. Again, I think it's the best looking version of the 25 original release version I've ever seen. I think the score is pretty good, and it has nice fidelity because it's a modern score, and it is presented in lossless PCM stereo. However, it would be nice if this was color tinted and had some of the other previously done scores for the 25 version. It also does not have the Man with the Lantern sequence at all. That was removed. So again, it would have been nice to have had that as an option to view, because a version of the Man with the Lantern is in the Hampton print, but some releases like this will remove that. It does have the Balmass sequence, but it is not the Technicolor version, obviously. It is in black and white with the rest of the features. So if you're used to seeing that sequence in Technicolor, in the two-color Technicolor version, it's going to take some getting used to seeing it not in color. But this is how people saw it for decades until the Technicolor footage was rediscovered. Also, it doesn't do the recreation of the coloring of the Phantom's cape on top of the opera either, but it is the best presentation in terms of quality of the 1925 release version, which really is the better film. It is a better put together, better paced, better edited. The 29 version does lose quite a bit of footage from the 25 version. It's much clunkier in its editing. It changes some things around. Most amusingly, the actress playing the singer Carlotta, who is going to be replaced by Christine, suddenly becomes Carlotta's mother, using the same footage, but just changing the intertitles when she confronts the managers of the opera house, and that happens in the 29 version. But if you've never seen the 25 version and you like the atmosphere and Chaney's amazing legendary performance as the Phantom, but you can't quite get on with the 29 version, or you can't put your finger on something, but something doesn't quite work for you, or you love the atmosphere in Chaney, but you don't think it's a very good film, chances are the 25 version will fix a lot of that for you. It's not perfect. Rupert Julian did not get on well with everyone, and famously, other footage was shot by other directors, particularly the final ending with the great chase out of the opera house was shot by others after the fact to give a sort of action climax, which really was needed, I think. But the 25 version plays much better. And for years, I could never understand why these things were just nagging at me and about not liking things in the 29 version, but loving the atmosphere and Chaney and the ideas. But it just felt kind of clunky in a lot of places. Well, it's because it's not the original film. It was re-edited by others, and you had additional footage being shoved in and things messed around with and losing scenes from the original. So I really think it's important for people to look at the 25 version. So having it here in HD and the best quality it's ever had on home video is major. It also runs at the proper 20 frames per second throughout, so there's no frame rate issues, there's no score sync issues. I think it's absolutely beautiful. The only issue I would say is I do wish it had at least had some sort of color tinting attempted, because that does help the experience. But still, absolutely the best quality that's ever been in terms of the home video market for the 25 version. And if you've never seen the 25 version, this is where you should start. However, if it had had at least some color tinting like the presentation on the Kino, even though that's an upscale, I do think it does help the experience when you have some color tinting going on. So what do you get in the lovely BFI release? So let's look at the art and packaging first. So here we have a section of one of the original posters with the really striking rendering of the Phantom, cloak and all. Nice spine from the BFI. Then the rear, giving you the overall presentation and extras information and the technical credits for the versions, plus the fact that this is a Blu-ray and 2 DVD release. We open to find discs with lovely labels. So again, we have one Blu-ray with both versions and the extras in HD. Then disc 1 on the DVD is a PAL DVD, again, with the full contents and both versions of the film in standard definition, but in the PAL format. However, when you do look at this, it does seem like, even though it runs at the PAL 4% faster speed, because 25 frames per second on the PAL format, it does seem like they actually properly pitch adjusted the audio. That's what PAL discs should do, to not have the sort of helium voice effect that so many do, but it's very infrequent that it's done. But it seems like they adjusted that here so all of the sound does not actually have the higher pitch, like it's somebody talking after they inhaled a balloon full of helium and it's just sped up too fast. And then DVD 2 is the feature documentary Kevin Brownlow made with TCM back in 2000 entitled Lon Chaney, A Thousand Faces. If you haven't seen it before, it's still, I think, the best overall documentary on Chaney. It's very much in the style that Brownlow would also do with his Universal Horror documentary. But because he's in the UK, these were originally done in the PAL format. This was included as an extra on the TCM Vault DVD set of Lon Chaney films, but it's a conversion from the PAL. Here you're getting it in the original PAL format. So obviously the voices will sound a little different because it's a PAL release, but this is actually how the documentary was originated, so it's perfectly fine to have it in PAL. But of course, you'll have to have a PAL-capable player here in the US to be able to view this content. The interior art is advertising other BFI releases. We also get a really nice booklet. Started off with really wonderful original artwork, but this has a lovely essay by Kevin Brownlow about his history with the film and trying to reconstruct it over a very long period of time, in addition to other critical pieces and interviews. And of course, it has lovely stills throughout. The paper has a nice sort of glossy feel to it, so it has a premium quality sense to it. Then we get information about the extras and, most importantly, the About the Transfer page. So what do you get in terms of the actual on-disc extras? Well, it lists the 25 version as an extra, but really it is, I think, the main feature or main draw of this release, the HD new transfer of the 25 version. The actual extras start, fascinatingly, with two versions of an original trailer, or the original silent 1925 trailer, which uses, I think, the title card from the 29 version, but definitely in the best quality I've ever seen it in. It is in black and white without any tinting. It runs about 3 minutes, but it looks excellent compared to other releases, and the trailers on here look even better than what's on the Kino disc. Also included is the 1929 reissue trailer advertising the addition of sound, but it's basically a very short minute-and-a-half recut of the original 1925 trailer, so it's interesting to compare the two. Now, the actual trailer itself is sepia-tinted. It is in HD. It looks quality-wise better than I've seen it before. And the soundtrack doesn't survive, but what they did was actually take pieces of the discovered sound reels and try and recut the best approximation of what the sound for this reissued trailer would be like. So it is technically different from previous presentations of this trailer because of that. Next is a true treasure and unbelievably important. The discovered Reel 5 from the 1929 sound reissue. This came from a discovery at the Library of Congress of a partial reel that was discovered. So this is the only surviving footage of the sound reissue, and unfortunately it wasn't complete and it was damaged in a number of areas. So what they've had to do was they did a brand new scan of the surviving footage, and then they mixed in shots and pieces of their restored 1929 master. And of course, the frame rate is different to match the different frame rate of the sound reissue. But essentially, it's massaged into a viewable form, and it's synchronized with the previously discovered sound surviving elements. So this is the only real way to approximate any footage of both picture and sound of the sound reissue version. And this is where you get the really interesting bit of all of a sudden, Christine goes into her room, she ages like 5 years because they got the same actors to come back and reshoot footage, shoot new footage, of course, and they're obviously much older. Of course, Chaney's Phantom was not allowed to be dubbed over, and so that's when the film suddenly becomes a silent film again. But interestingly, this scene includes the character they came up with of the Phantom's assistant, so you actually get to see how that was done in this sort of hodgepodge of a silent/sound remake, additional expanded version of the 1925 film. And it's fascinating to look at, and the quality, in spite of the damage, is just, it's fascinating to see in HD and from a new scan. And it's was thought impossible that anybody would ever discover any of the sound version footage. So it's amazing that anything turned up, and to see it this way in this approximation is another reason why this is a must-own for any fan of the film. And then it concludes by including the Man with the Lantern sequence separate from the transfer. It is in HD without any tinting, and this is presented simply to preserve this odd opening that is on most versions existing of the film, but it is still debated and generally thought to not have been part of any of the original releases, so that is why it was determined to remove it from the restoration masters and only include it as a separate extra. So that is the BFI Blu-ray release of the Photoplay restoration of the Phantom of the Opera. It is not a fully comprehensive release because it doesn't have all of the various extras of the Kino and Image discs, or especially the extras still exclusive to the Milestone DVD, which is still important to hang on to. So I think for any Phantom of the Opera collection, I think if you want the best of everything and to have the best versions of the two main restorations, how they stand today in 2022, and have all of the great essential extras, I think you really have to have 3 releases. I think you need to have the Milestone DVD for its extras, particularly because it has all of the 1929 talkie sound from the surviving sound discs. That is fully preserved on that release. And it has the best extra from any release, the Scott McQueen audio commentary, which is one of the great audio commentaries in all of home video. So that's important to hang on to for its exclusive extras and scores and things. However, in terms of Blu-ray, I think you really have to have both the BFI presentation and the Kino presentation. The Kino does have some exclusive extras that are quite nice. It does have the nice scores, and I like most of the color tinting on the 25 version, even though it's a standard def upscale. However, it does have technical issues that hold it back some that I wish had been ironed out. The BFI doesn't have any of those issues, and the Photoplay restoration, I think, has nice positives in comparison to the Blackhawk on the Kino. But again, you have sort of a trade-off here and there. No release is perfect, and the BFI does have really essential nice extras as well, particularly the recreation and use of the surviving Reel 5 of the sound version, which is really amazing. The HD trailers look really nice. The Lon Chaney documentary is also excellent, of course. But the real draw of this is the presentation of the 1925 version, which is far and away better in quality than any other edition I've ever seen. The only drawback is I don't quite like the score as much as some of the other scores. Again, it is perfectly fine and a good score, don't get me wrong. But the lack of color tinting, I wish it was tinted, at least as well as the Kino version was. But it's still a must-own release for the amazing quality of the 1925 version, the real uptick in quality on the Photoplay restoration of the 29 version, and it doesn't have any of the technical problems of the US Blu-rays, which is a major plus. And again, the essential extras here that are exclusive to this release, I think, make it important. And I think there are pluses and positives of both the BFI and the Kino. So in short, I think you need both Blu-ray releases. Neither one is very expensive, and fortunately, the BFI is region-free, so you can import this or pick it up wherever you buy UK Blu-ray titles. And you don't have to have a region-free player for the Blu-ray disc itself. You would have to have something for the PAL DVDs if you wanted to watch those. But the Blu-ray disc itself is perfectly fine on US players. It is region-free, and I think the transfer quality, and particularly the extras and the presentation of the 1925 version, really make it essential. And I think it makes a perfect companion release to the Kino. And I think you really do kind of have to have both for different reasons. So I will say that I do think the BFI has the nicer package because it has the deluxe case and the lovely booklet, whereas the Kino, it does have nice art, and it is a 2-disc set from Kino, but it doesn't have as fancy of a package. So those are my thoughts and my general review of the BFI Blu-ray release of the 1925 version of the Phantom of the Opera. Unfortunately, there is no conclusive, easy answer for, one single video release that will be the one to own and better than all of them. But with this film, with Phantom of the Opera, you wouldn't really expect there to be just one, because the film's release history and legacy continues to grow and expand, and it seems every couple of years there's another little scrap that is discovered in terms of history, or a different release version, or a foreign export version, or when the sound discs were rediscovered, and then a couple years ago, just more recently, the discovery of the mostly complete Reel 5 of the sound version. That was an unbelievable treasure of a find. So it seems every couple of years there's a new theory or a new bit of information that comes to light, and this film never ceases to give up further information about itself. It remains sort of elusive in that way. So I think it's fitting that if you want to have all the best versions of the film and the different restorations and all the great extras and scores and things, and to get around most of the technical problems, that you do still need to at least have multiple copies. I think if you have both the BFI and the Kino Blu-rays, you'll be pretty set. But I think it's also important to have and hang on to the old Milestone DVD for its essential and amazing extras, even though the presentation is superseded by the Blu-ray releases. So I think it's important to have two in terms of the Blu-ray, but also the Milestone DVD as well. So I think if you have all three of these, you'll be pretty set in terms of Phantom of the Opera content on disc, and that is until hopefully somebody comes along, whether it's an update to the Photoplay or Blackhawk restorations, and really tries to iron out a lot of these issues and make a definitive release. It is rumored Universal might be working on a 4K restoration of Phantom in the way that they did Hunchback of Notre Dame, which, even though it was the same source, it was a dramatic improvement over the previous restoration that had come out on Blu-ray from Flickr Alley. It was unbelievable what they were able to pull out. So I've been hoping the rumors are true and they might be able to do something similar with Phantom of the Opera. Particularly, I'm hoping they're going to work on the 25 version. I think it's important to preserve both. I think it's important to preserve all the elements of Phantom, and hopefully maybe they might somehow turn up additional sources or bits of material that were previously not known to exist, because it's Universal themselves trying it. And again, their work on Hunchback was so incredible that I just keep hoping that they are indeed working on Phantom, and maybe in a couple years we might have a brand new restoration and releases to talk about. But until then, I think this is really how it stands. I think both Blu-rays from Kino and the BFI are important in their different ways. Neither one is definitive, and I think it's important to have both, along with the old Milestone DVD. So I hope this has been fun and at least somewhat informative to hear me once again babble on about classic films and the never-ending saga of the 1925 Phantom of the Opera from Universal. So until next time, keep your disc spinning to help keep physical media alive, and thanks ever so much for watching. I've got to go because they're holding Box 5 open for me at the Opera House.